4 years have passed since the fire took everything, since the roar of panic drowned the sound of her heartbeat, and a boy was left staring into smoke with empty hands and a name trapped in his throat. And yet, through every silent dawn, he still feels her presence like heat beneath cold skin, like breath that never left the air. And somewhere far beyond the reach of maps, a lioness limps through flame, dragging a crushed leg, and a secret she's carried across time, not just survival, but the memory of a boy, the sound of his voice, the shape of his touch. Something no distance could burn away, and as the fire returns, she does not run. She turns, she crawls, she remembers, because some stories are not lost, they are waiting. Some love is not broken, it is buried alive, aching to return. And when the wild meets the human again, it will not ask for permission. It will demand to be seen, to be known, to be whole. Each morning, Quito rises with the sun, just as he always did when she was there. Though now his footsteps are slower, quieter, as if not to disturb a silence that already screams in his chest. He tends the goats, fetches water from the same stream where she once splashed beside him, and every movement holds the shape of memory, his hand brushing the tall grass where her fur once shimmered in gold. His eyes scanning the distant ridge, not searching exactly, just looking the way one looks when they've forgotten how to stop the villagers. Say he's grown steady, responsible, but they do not see how he lingers too long near the edge of the clearing, or how he hums the lullaby he used to whisper into her ear. They do not hear the soft rustle of her name when the wind shifts, or catch the flicker of pain. When children ask why he lives alone at night, he lies on his back, eyes open to the stars, recalling the steady rhythm of her breathing against him. And though the world is quiet, something in him waits, holds tight to a feeling not fully gone, a presence not fully past, because peace has returned, but it is a hollow kind, the kind that echoes, the kind that mourns without sound. It happened too fast, too loud, too bright. The sky cracked open and the earth turned to flame. One moment they were running side by side, and the next she was gone, swallowed by smoke, by noise, by something Quito couldn't fight. He screamed her name until his voice broke, until the fire drowned everything, but the sound of his own heartbeat pounding against the emptiness where she should have been when it was over. The world was grey. The trees were black, and he stood in the ruins with ash on his skin and silence in his chest. The days that followed stretched like wounds. He walked through them, hollow tracing old paths, finding nothing but scorched ground and the cruel echo of what used to be the villagers told him to let go. Said animals do not return. Said he should be grateful to have survived. But what is survival when the part of you that mattered is missing? He became quieter still, eyes always fixed on the horizon. Sleep, never deep breath, never full and miles away beneath a burned sky. Asha too moved like a shadow, limping through unfamiliar land, her leg twisted from falling timber, her spirit blistered not by flame, but by the sudden absence of him. She listened for his voice in every wind, sniffed the dust for some trace of his presence, but found only her own fear and the small heartbeat of a cub pressed against her side. She stayed alive because she had to, but in her eyes the wildness dulled and time lost meaning. Days bled into nights, into seasons, into years, both of them suspended in a silence that never truly ended, because some losses do not scream. They whisper endlessly inside where no one can hear. Let me pause for a moment and turn to you. Where are you listening from right now? Have you ever had someone, a person or even an animal, remember you after years apart? A look, a sound, a feeling that said, I haven't forgotten you. If that moment ever touched your life, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if you feel the pull of stories like this, full of memory, loss, and the quiet power of reunion, make sure to subscribe. There's so much more to come. It started with smoke on the horizon, a thick dark column rising over the trees, and Quito stood frozen water bucket in hand, heart suddenly hammering. Not from fear of fire, but from something older, deeper, a memory uncoiling in his chest. Later, someone in the village mentioned a wildfire near the old hills, and someone else laughed about wild animals fleeing toward the valley. But Quito didn't laugh. He couldn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat by the edge of the clearing staring into the dark the way he used to when he waited for her to come home from a hunt. His fingers traced the frayed edge of an old photo tucked in his pocket. Faded and worn, taken years ago, just after he found her barely alive and wrapped in a blanket. Too big for her body. Hadn't looked at it in so long, and now it felt alive in his hands. Something tugged at him. Not logic, not reason, but instinct. The same pull that once told a boy to save a dying cub, and now whispered, "What if she remembers? What if she's out there wounded, calling for you?" He tried to push it down, to tell himself it was foolish that she was gone, or changed, or wild beyond recognition. But the thought would not die. Instead, it grew with the wind, with the rising smoke, with the ache in his chest that had never really healed, and somewhere far from him, Asha dragged her crushed leg over cracked earth, every movement tearing something inside her, every breath filled with ash. But the scent of distant water pulled her forward, and more than that, the shadow of a memory, not just of a boy, but of warmth, of safety, of a name said with love. It hurt to move, but it hurt more to stop, so she kept crawling, not to escape, but to return, driven by something no fire could burn through. Because sometimes what saves you once calls you home again, and both of them, though miles apart, were moving now toward the same place, toward the question that burned louder than fear. What if I'm not forgotten? He almost didn't turn at first, the sound too faint, too wild to be real. But then the wind shifted again, and something older than memory stirred in his blood. Not fear, not even hope, just a stillness. And in that stillness, he heard it again. A cry low and strained. And then beneath it, something else. Something he hadn't felt in 4 long years, her scent not strong but present enough to freeze him. Mid-step, the water jug slipped from his hand unnoticed, and he ran. Not because he believed, but because his body moved before thought could catch it. The trees blurred, the grass tore, at his skin. And then he saw her, a shape on the ground, too still, too small, and yet impossibly familiar. Asha collapsed just beyond the clearing, her side rising in shallow tremors. Her cub pressed into her ribs, eyes wide and silent, and for a moment Quito couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All he saw was the curve of her face, the scar along her flank, the way one ear tilted just slightly, the wrong way, and then she opened her eyes, and time cracked open. Amber met brown, and something ancient surged between them, not memory, but knowing. The air thickened, the noise of the world fell away, and they stared, not moving, not speaking, as if afraid any sound would break it, the spell, the thread, the truth. Her paw shifted barely a twitch forward, broken, bleeding, but reaching, and Quito dropped to his knees, not like a man collapsing, but like a child returning home. He said her name once, and it broke inside him, not a word but a wound, and she answered, not with a roar, not with strength, but with that soft sound he hadn't heard since boyhood, the sound she made only for him. And in that moment, in that impossible quiet, the years vanished. The pain paused. The fire faded, and there was only this look, this breath, this heartbeat suspended between them, two souls, shattered by time, reunited, not with noise, but with silence. Because sometimes love does not return in triumph. It crawls, it limps, it bleeds, and yet it arrives whole. The days that followed moved slowly, not out of pain, but out of care, as if the world itself had learned to breathe softer around them. Quito woke before the sun, now not from restlessness, but from purpose, stepping outside just to watch her sleep. Her chest rising steady, her cub curled close. Then she would lift her head, and that soft rumble would rise again. the sound that once lulled him to sleep and now called him back to life. He began to speak to her again quietly as he worked, retelling stories from their youth stories. She had lived with him stories she now listened to, with eyes half closed and calm. She didn't need to understand the words, only the voice, the tone, the shape of home. She followed him, sometimes limping carefully to the garden where he would pause, pretend not to notice the way her cub stalked butterflies just as she once did, and in the evenings when the village turned golden, he would sit in the grass beside her, not touching at first, just near enough for her to know. And then one day, without thinking, he reached out and rested his hand gently on her shoulder, and she leaned into it a fraction, and that was enough. Later he caught himself laughing out loud, not for anyone, just at the clumsy antics of her cub, and he realized it had been years since that sound had come from his mouth. Naturally healing, didn't arrive like a wave. It crept in quietly, in the way she began to rise without wincing, in the way he began to sleep without dreaming of smoke, in the way silence between them felt full, not hollow, and though neither of them would ever be what they were, before they no longer had to be what they were after, because what had been broken was not forgotten. It was carried, it was cared for, it was met again in small gestures and steady presence. And in the end, healing looked like this, not triumph, not return, but a hand on fur, a sigh shared in the sun, a quiet life still burning with memory and the soft certainty that some love survives everything. Even fire, even silence, even time. Some bonds don't vanish with time. They simply fall quiet, waiting beneath the surface of memory, beneath the weight of days until the world opens just enough for them to return. Not as echoes, but as breath, as presence, as truth. They do not knock or ask. They arrive when hearts are ready again, and when they do, something shifts. Not loudly, but deeply. Keto no longer waits. He lives, and Asha no longer searches. She rests the space between them, once filled with silence, now holds something softer, stronger, a kind of peace, born not from forgetting, but from remembering together, because the strongest connections don't break. They endure in stillness, in pain, in hope. And when they return, they don't bring back the past. They offer something rarer, a beginning woven from what survived.